All right. Hey, everybody. Thank you all for joining. Let's get started over here. My name is Sam Fatui. I lead business development at Pulsa. I'm also joined here by Dave, who is the CEO of Pulsa, and Jamie, our manager. Thank you all for joining. I'm really excited to kick off our webinar series with everybody here. For this webinar, we'll be focused on using Pulsa to optimize your entire end-to-end operation. And before getting started with this specific comment, I'd like to know that we have 2 more webinars coming up in the next couple of weeks. What we've done intentionally is kept every webinar very short and digestible at only 30 minutes in length with a decent amount of time at the end for Q&A. And we have built a series for all folks involved in the industrial gas business, from customers to distributors across the board. We'll be sharing the slides afterwards to all attendees as well. And after the webinar, we'll send you all a video with the content and links to register for the upcoming webinars. Next week, we're going to be hosting a discussion with a more detailed overview of all the sensors that Pulsa offers. We're going to be describing the hardware capabilities of each sensor and then show off our software innovations and some of the latest work that we've done with our dashboard and our app and so forth there. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be conducting one really on the business case of using Pulsa. A common thing that we hear from customers is that they really like the technology, but don't know how to make a business case for actually deploying it. And this session will go through kind of how the business case of Pulsa can be used as a powerful tool to significantly increase profitability, which includes improving sales, including operational spend, and a phased approach for how to get started with deploying the platform. And for now, these are the webinars we have on the group, but really depending on kind of our shelter at home business climate that we have over the next couple of weeks and months, we might schedule a few more sessions moving forward. And I want to note that if your team in particular would like to have a private webinar with the sales and operations team and the executive team with questions specific to your group, please reach out and we'll get something going on the calendar. For today, let's go into today's content. I'll start out with an introduction on our products and company, and then I'll go into really an overview of the main packaged gas delivery types. After that, I'll talk about really how the telemetry landscape has changed across those different kinds of assets and why it's relevant here. And then I'll talk about how telemetry in general can be used to optimize your end-to-end operation. And I'll leave maybe 5-10 minutes open at the end for Q&A. And of course, we can go over as required. So I'd like to just do a quick introduction over Pulsa and why we're here. For some quick background on our company, we are a leading industrial gas telemetry company, and we have several different wireless sensors in the market. We have a differential pressure sensor, which works great on your bulk tanks. These great on your micro bulk tanks, and many dewars, which have the appropriate plumbing for those sensors. The general rule of thumb is that there's a gauge. If there's a gauge on your level for your tank, you can use this particular sensor. We have a couple of also weight-based platforms. Our heavy-duty platform is built off of a powder-coated steel frame. It can support a few thousand pounds. It's purpose-built for liquid tanks like your BEV carb, CO2 tanks, any of your liquefied argon, oxygen, nitrogen, helium, and other gases and blends and dewars, welding wire, anything that's heavy, hundreds and thousands of pounds. We also have another weight platform that is plastic, and it can support a few hundred pounds. These work phenomenally for individual CO2 cylinders, nitrous, chemtame, ammonia, and any other products that you can really measure with weight. And our first sensor mark is a high pressure sensor. And this sensor fits in the palm of your hand, and it connects to a cylinder via 1/4-inch MPT port. This is great for your spec gases. Any situation where you have a manifold is really a slam dunk for this particular type of sensor, lab environment, anything where there's switchovers and helium and argon. Any type of gas where you really have it in a switchover manifold or any type of lab deployment is phenomenal here. All these sensors are completely wireless, 5-year battery life, and are weatherproof outside. They communicate via cellular networks and work across all different providers, Verizon, T-Mobile, and all bands with just one hardware platform. Setup is very simple, 5 minutes or less in software. And I'll go a lot more detail into the hardware and also click through in the platform, the software platform next week. And feel free to check out the website or email if you have any specific questions. We build and own all the IP in-house. We have our own in-house software and hardware development team, and typically release software and hardware every 6 weeks. We actually just released a major software feature, a full refresh of our entire dashboard last week. And one of the nice things about the full ownership of our hardware is we have some supply chain resilience. We've actually, in the recent months, we have partners across the globe, but we were able to move production actually locally in certain instances to make sure that we had enough inventory to meet the supply needs for all customers. We're currently working with about 100 different distributors in North America. I'm primarily focused on the North American market today, and have done a little bit of work outside the country as well. Let's go into really the topic at hand now, though. I'd like to go into a very high-level overview of really telemetry across bulk, which I would imagine when most people hear the term telemetry, that's immediately what they think about is bulk and non-bulk assets. This will be very valuable to contextualize really the state of the industry across both bulk and what I'm defining as non-bulk. And I'm going to use some very high-level general numbers here. I know we have folks on the call that will have different definitions of what each term means, but I'm going to just use some general numbers here as just kind of setting the stage. I'm defining bulk as your typical non-mobile installed bulk and micro-bulk platforms. Let's say you're talking about thousands of liters of gas, or let's say 5,000 pounds total. That would fall really into the bulk category. And really, a rough estimate was about 600K from kind of the polling that we did for folks in the industry, which you can, add, remove some, depending on exactly on what you're including as part of industrial gases. We've seen that across the board that roughly 80% of those assets, and actually some folks pushed back last time about this and said, I'd say 95 to 99% of the new bulk tanks that get installed now all have some kind of telemetry, and they're typically using some kind of differential pressure sensor out there. For dewars and high pressure cylinders, we're really looking at a number of kind of almost 100 times the number of bulk tanks, and probably somewhere closer to 60 million assets in circulation. Of course, similar to the point that I made earlier about bulk, this all depends on what your definition of industrial gas is, what your definition of where the line between bulk and dewars and cylinders is. Lower ratio of bulk or micro bulk, but typically we're seeing probably around 50x to 200x more cylinders and dewars and bulk tanks in the field for most just distributors, customer use cases, and so forth. And from our estimates, really less than 1% of those have some kind of telemetry enabled. And typically you can use a combination of weight, for gases like CO2 and in cryogenic tanks, or high pressure to monitor inventory for those particular types of assets. Now I'd really like to look at how telemetry works in the bulk gas segment. As noted earlier, most of these assets have remote monitoring installed, and really we think of this as a win for the value of telemetry in our segment. The telemetry being installed out there leads distributors to only visit those customers when absolutely necessary, and milk runs, check stops just to check levels of tanks really aren't as common for these particular types of assets. Telemetry is often just part of your SOP, your standard operating process for the installation of bulk tanks. Almost all bulk tank agreements include telemetry with them. And because of the high cost of assets, we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars from both the upfront hardware and gas servicing perspective. You're starting in the thousands of dollars per month per bulk tank. The high cost of telemetry that previously existed in the market, where you're talking about paying a few $1,000 for the hardware and dozens, if not hundreds of dollars a month, it still easily works very well in the ROI for these assets. The installation of these bulk tanks take hours. They're very infrequent. You're not installing a bulk tank every day at a particular customer. And they really usually have like your expert staff. You usually have an installer that is going out there that's done this many times, who are drilling the tank into the ground. And so really it's not that big of an issue to spend some extra time calling into a cell provider to get your telemetry up and running. If it takes you an hour or so to get telemetry working, that's fine. It's not a big issue compared to the overall high cost and time to actually install a bulk tank. And with this, visibility what telemetry provides, bulk gas customers, they just don't run out of gas that often. When we really look at, as I mentioned earlier, industry segments that have been positively impacted by telemetry, bulk is definitely at the top of the list. And I want to be very clear here, bulk gas is one of our most exciting industries at Pulsa. We have a great solution, and I don't know if it's our fastest growing segment, but it's one of our quicker growing segments for all of our sensor types. So we're a huge advocate for it. But it's a product that I think most people are familiar with, that's seen in the market for the last 20, 30 years, evolution of bulk gas telemetry. And what I'd really like to focus on kind of to continue the conversation is, what about the rest of telemetry on packaged gases, which really represent the majority of assets in the field today? So as noted earlier, telemetry is significantly less common for high pressure cylinders and dewars. It's a completely different supply chain. And I know that from like the distributor folks on the phone call today and the customers, it's a completely different team and staff that manage the delivery and the asset types themselves, who are managing logistics and sales versus the cylinder sale business. So cylinders are almost kind of a different part of the business altogether. Distributors really often bear the brunt of managing the supply chain for these assets. There's often inbound call-in orders, frequent milk runs just to check levels and top customers off, or really educated guesses for the proper time to replenish inventory without actual remote visibility. Even with the best software type packages out there, there's still a high element of guessing of when to replenish inventory. Gas customers often have cylinders swapped out and dewars topped off, really with ample inventory remaining. And the main reason for this is the distributor is on very high pressure to make sure that the customer doesn't run out. And so with inconsistent consumption, the distributor will frequently go to customers more often than is always necessary to make sure that they're not going to run out. And even on cryogenic tanks, because of this, there's some fill loss when the product's getting filled. We often hear that probably the best in class is about 40% of fill, where we're talking about if you have tanks or you have cylinders at a customer site. Typically, best in class on average is you're filling up, let's say you have a 500-pound tank, probably on average you're filling up about 200 pounds on that per visit. And sometimes it's 100, sometimes it's 400, but because of inconsistency, the consumption, really the best in class tends to be close to 40%. And of course, in certain segments it's better, in certain segments it's worse, but that's what we've kind of heard across the market in general. And you know, as I mentioned, distributors, it's a high pressure game here. It's very high pressure stakes. The distributors bend over backwards to avoid stockouts, and emergency deliveries are a common occurrence. We constantly hear concerns from both distributors and gas customers who are saying, you know, they have to call an emergency because they just don't know the level that they're at. And they consume much more. If you're at a brewery and they just did they're brewing a few different types batches of beer, they're going to run out of gas much quicker than they're normally doing in their normal operation. You could have a rash of different appointments at a hospital, and they're using constantly more oxygen and nitrous to make sure that they're able to support that the need from their customers, and then they're just running out, where the distributor had been doing their best to make sure that they were monitoring the gas at that level. This causes distributors and customers to rack up overtime costs, emergency delivery costs, and burden really their sales force with handling operational challenges, and ultimately have to provide, you know, break their own back to ultimately provide subpar service in the industry. And these cylinders and tanks are often in high foot traffic areas, so it's not like you can stick something with a giant wire, bunch of cables and all these kind of things around in the middle of a lab or in the middle of a brewery. You can't get something very cumbersome in these areas. So there's not extra space for some bulky giant telemetry installation. And so I touched on a lot of the factors which have historically blocked the adoption of telemetry across these assets. And I'd like to kind of go like element by element, really. And these are kind of, when we look at all the problems in the market, these are the ones that frequently come up in our discussions. One is the complexity in setting up the sensors. And this is for the existing kind of telemetry solutions out there. The one is a big complexity setting up the sensors. Unlike on bulk tanks that sit outside in the building, you can't have a ton of wires that get in the way of accessing top floor and so forth. And because, you know, these installations and these deployments are a lot more in and out, with people spinning on cylinders or filling up on a fill box outside for, you know, not a significant amount of time, the customer can't have a distributor spending hours in their calling their telemetry provider to get them to provision network access when they're trying to move forward with their next medical process or pour some drinks. It's also historically been very cost prohibitive. When you're talking about thousands of dollars of hardware and dozens of dollars, if not more, and the hundreds of dollars, that's fine for bulk tank. But when you're talking about an installation that might be somewhere in the couple $100 a month of cost of product, and the actual hardware is, you know, less than $1,000, that gets to be prohibitive, right? And that really, the cost of actually monitoring the asset outpaces the ROI of supply chain improvements. And maintaining this hardware is a challenge. When you're talking about thousands of dollars of hardware, that's another asset that you have to maintain, service, make sure that it's working out well in the field. And really relying on that single cellular provider often makes setup a challenge. And there's many locations where there's no single provider. And so distributors and customers just have this other headache of, I need to get this very expensive asset that I need to monitor out in the field. And it's just not good enough, really. It's not good enough to make it valuable. And really what we've noticed is that because, as I mentioned before, distributors often are willing to bend over backwards to support customers, customers just don't see that, and they're unwilling to pay a high hardware and service fee to support their you know, an additional fee for legacy cylinder telemetry and solutions. We really find that customers will often say, yes, I do care about my gas inventory level and it's critical to me, but really that's my distributor's job to make sure that I don't run out. Now let's talk about really what we've been able to do as Pulsa to kind of change what the conversation has been. You know, with the latest solutions out there, wireless and IoT, you know, the telemetry installation has become very simple with Pulsa. There's no buttons on our solution, there's no cables, and really complicated installations have gone down from, let's say, a couple hours to 10 to 15 minutes, which is typically the average time that we hear that it takes for someone to actually set up one of our sensors in the field. One of the big differences is that there's not also a lot of pre-provisioning with our hardware. You can set up our hardware at your own office and then just hand it to one of your drivers or someone in delivery, or even anyone with no technical expertise, and just say, plug this in, wait till it turns green, and get out of there. So your installation costs almost go down to zero, and the time almost goes down significantly. And the hardware and communication costs have gone down significantly. When you're looking at a Pulsa deployment, you're starting in sub hundreds of dollars per sensor to get it out there. And you're looking at that significantly less than the cost of asset that you're monitoring. And ongoing costs have also significantly dropped to lower than the monthly product and distribution costs. When you're saying, rather than dozens of dollars, hundreds of dollars, we're talking about, you know, less than $8 per installation. And that means, and there's still no more finding Wi-Fi hotspots, Ethernet cables, or anything like that to save a few bucks. The cellular fees now are low and easily built out for large scale deployments. And really, with the improved cellular IoT technology, communications access is much more readily accessible. Our Pulsa system works dynamically across multiple platforms and work wherever there's different cellular provider. We basically tested out across the country and globally and have not found an area where there's not work. I'm not saying that it's going to work in the middle of Old Faithful, but there probably are areas that you can count on a hand where cellular provide coverage is not there. And really, with any solution that's cloud-based and was built from the cloud up, all the software updates are perpetually improving the value derived from your hardware over time. I noted earlier that we release software every 6 weeks. And so that means is every time you refresh your browser, that hardware installation that you did 2 years ago is actually becoming more and more valuable as an operational tool in your operation, your business. And all these components together really enable widespread adoption across the market. So with the low cost, simple installations, distributors themselves no longer have to require and rely on income from customers to implement telemetry. The cost now easily gets baked in. And when you're talking about, you know, a couple $100 on your service and then just $5, $10, $20 for telemetry, it becomes a much easier thing to bake in because the distributors and the customers themselves are both sharing in the benefit of never running out of product, not having emergency deliveries, not having to top off and visit customers and bother the operation, bother the distribution much more frequently than you need to. And so really, distributors themselves now have the incentive of, rather than trying to bill out their customer and get their customer to pay for it, just wanting to deploy the Pulsa telemetry to their customers so they can fill up valuable resources to optimize delivery economics and optimize their own productivity. And what, like, almost the point that we always see is when you ask any distributor in the market, do you want to have full visibility? And distributor or customer, do you want to have full visibility of your assets? The answer is all historically that they've been blocked by all these roadblocks that I mentioned in the last slide. And now that we've been able to engineer out these roadblocks, let's look at like the impact that we can talk about through here. So we've been keeping close tabs on the industry at large, and we're seeing these trends and demand growing rapidly, not just in North America, but as I mentioned, we're starting to see more kind of inbound across the globe. Our presence, as probably a lot of folks on the phone know, has primarily been in the US and North America, but we're really getting significant amount of inbound across the globe because people are seeing where this model goes. And what you've seen in the past, I'm sure, is very highly specialized solutions that work in very narrow customer deployment scenarios. These solutions, as I talked about before, are built with economics very similar to bulk and saw very low traction. When you're talking about thousands of dollars, there's only a narrow band of use cases that are applicable, and customers would deal with, they'd raise their hand and say, I need this product because I can't run out. Now we're seeing an incredibly high interest in deploying our solution across the market, across the sensors. And what we frankly have been seeing is that more and more distributors are using our platform as a way to take out their competitors to go market cheaper with a better technical solution and win out business. And we've already seen people just taking out their own competitors within their market where they've been able to deploy Pulsa. And really with this technology becoming pervasive in this industry, we're seeing that the folks who aren't using this type of tech really not only lose ground on the fact of profitability, but also lose customers to competitors be profitably at a much lower cost point. And so for folks who are the distributors on the line, we're not seeing this as a transition of if it's going to happen, but really a when is this going to happen. I'd like to close out with just another industry that's close to home, which really started widespread adoption of data analytics. Trucking and routing in general has been greatly optimized through the use of various routing software, telematics sensors. I want to highlight a 5-year-old company in the space called Samsara. They have about over 10,000 customers, and they've received over $500 million in funding attacking this space. But let's be frank, the problem they've solved here is much less core than the problem we're aiming to solve. What they've done is routing analytics to provide the better efficiency and use of your trucks. And I imagine a lot of folks who are distributors on this call are familiar with whether it's Samsara's, other types of solutions in the space. But the solution is just basically aiming to say, your trucks that you're already sending out, make them go more efficiently. But Telemetry, the product that we're talking about here, can change the way that all of your customers are serviced. Rather than just optimizing routes, you're able to completely remove routes and completely reuse your existing delivery assets and your delivery team in a way to support your growth and not have to shrink your operations or shrink your sales because your operations are limited. This added capacity can be used for anything, and we've really seen that distributors use this to invest more in operations. And so on that note, I actually wanted to leave some time for questions and discussion. If you want to raise your hand, you can actually, there's a raise hand function. It should be down at the bottom of your window, or you can send a message over to the moderator to, I think it's Pulsa operations, Pulsa information, and you can use send a chat message there, and Jamie over here will be able to ask some questions. So on that note, just want to pause, say thanks everybody for the time, and just, yeah, leave it open for questions.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, use the raise hand button at the bottom there, and I'll open up your ability to talk.
Jamie, I can't hear you. I do see your mouth moving, though. Jamie, if you want to send me, if you have a chat message, you could send it to me in the chat window too, if you're not able to get the audio working, and I can answer it directly. Oh, okay. So I saw the note from Peter asking if this is approved for medical purposes. Yes, we have sensors. You would just essentially, for oxygen, we clean them for oxygen service.
Excellent. Can you guys hear me?
I can hear, yes.
Oh, okay. So that's probably my biggest use would currently be some of my medical providers that require once or twice a week stops on their manifolds. And we're looking for something to integrate with the, is it Beacon Medeus on their, just on the outlet side of their manifold, so we can monitor when it switches and actually be able to tell. So anything in quarter NPT would be all we would need.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, we can definitely plug it in.
Excellent.
And Peter, what I can do is I'll send a note over to you with some more information right after the call, and we could talk through how that would work in your deployment.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome. I saw a question about how many countries have deployed the technology. Right now, we're in U.S., Canada, Mexico, Panama, but we have tested our hardware out in Latin America, down in Brazil. We've tested out in China. We've tested out in Europe. We are primarily focused on the U.S. market. We've had some inbound from Europe about the technology, but we feel like there's a lot of problems to solve in the U.S. But if there's frankly some folks who are outside the country that want to run with it, we'll run with it with them. Any other questions from the team?
Do you have a catalog online I can look at?
Yeah, if you go to just our website, Google Pulsa, and it's just pulsasensors.com, that's our website. So there's a ton of information there, and feel free. What I'm going to do, I'll send out an email right after this meeting with my contact information, Jamie's contact information, Dave's contact information from our team, and we can get on the phone with just any kind of more detailed questions that anyone on the webinar has. And we'll be, as I mentioned, we're going to be continuing to schedule follow-on meetings. And I think, Lucas, you just had a question. The answer is yes. We will have the recording available for all attendees. We'll be uploading it on YouTube shortly. And what I'll do is we'll send it out right after the meeting.
Thanks.
So there's a question about the weight platforms. How do you maneuver tanks on the platforms? That's a great question. So what we do is for the heavy duty one, which is a much more heavier duty product, we do have a ramp that people can use to roll it on. What we've noticed is that the Doer wheels aren't phenomenal because, and I'm sure anyone who's managed like the 330 liter type Doers, is those wheels, if you even have like an extension cable, it's tough to roll them on top. But we do have a ramp that works well to get the product on top of the scale. And the plastic platform is about, I think it's about an inch tall. So it's not, people typically just roll it on there and can dump it on there. And we've engineered the product, as I mentioned, it supports 260 pounds, but it handles a point a little bit more. So you can just kind of, you can angle it in there and drop it on there, and that's usually not a problem. All right, well, that's great. We got just wrapping up in 30 minutes, so that's good. And I'd like to thank everyone for attending. We will send out the video to everybody on the call, and then we'll be doing these every week. So next Tuesday, same time, we're going to have one that really goes into kind of the product and the hardware itself. And the week after, we're going to talk about kind of the business economics and everything there. So really looking forward to continuing to engage over the coming weeks, especially as a lot of us probably are spending a little bit more time at our desks or at home than we were before. So kind of keeping the momentum going and everything like that. So thanks, everybody. And looking forward to supporting you all.